Good afternoon and welcome to the 190th of the COVID calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Today we have a continuation of our discussion of choreography in the pandemic with David Brick and Eiko Otake. Just a reminder, you can catch COVID Calls live every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. Just go to the COVID Calls YouTube channel to watch. You can also watch COVID Calls on Facebook Live and on Periscope. You can hear COVID Calls anytime recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID Calls via Twitter using the handle @USOfDisaster or @COVID Calls. Please help spread the word and send suggestions for future guests and future topics. Please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. As of today, December 17th, 2020, there are 1,657,132 deaths from COVID-19 globally, according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. There are 17,110,219 cases in the United States, and there are now a total of 309,334 deaths reported in the United States from COVID-19. That's up from 306,243 reported yesterday. Japan reports 2,623 deaths from COVID-19. As a way to bring some humanity to the numbers, I've been reading a life story or a story of advocacy for those impacted by the pandemic in some way. We've talked a lot about memorials on COVID Calls. I'd like to continue that discussion now. The headline is, "Where are all the memorials to Americans killed by COVID-19?" This is written by Kate McQuaid and appeared in the Boston Globe on December 3rd. At the end of August, the city of Detroit staged Detroit Memorial Day. Hundreds of blown-up photos of Detroiters who had died of COVID lined the streets of Belle Isle. Church bells rang, 14 funeral processions led by hearses made the circuit. Seeing images on Twitter, I gasped in relief. Somebody was acknowledging the mass casualties. Someone was making a space to mourn. 3 months and roughly 100,000 deaths later, there still aren't many COVID memorial projects. Neither Boston nor Cambridge has announced plans for one. Of course, truly public art underwritten by governments can move at a glacial pace, and maybe we need to get on the other side of the pandemic. But contending with COVID's impact isn't precisely the same as mourning the lost. One of the cruelties of COVID is it forbids the memorialization of its victims in real time, said James E. Young, founding director of the Institute for Holocaust, Genocide, and Memory Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a self-described memorialist. To commemorate the victims is to turn others into victims, he said. But it's not just the contagion. It's a White House in active denial and a president who has politicized an epic disaster. Some artists can't help but act. In May, as New York was pulling out of its early siege with the disease, artist Jorge Rodriguez Herrada had a conversation with philanthropist Henry R. Munoz III, co-founder of the healthcare network Somos Community Care. I said, "There's no major altars, nothing happening to make a place to heal, no images on any grand scale," Rodriguez Herrada said over the phone from Barcelona, where he lives part-time. He said, "Let's change that." The artist, underwritten in part by Somos Community Care, created Somos la Luz, Spanish for "We Are Light," a 27,500 square foot mural in a Queens parking lot depicting a doctor in a face mask. Only his eyes are visible. They are those of Dr. Ildefonso Decu, a pediatrician who died of COVID. His wife told me he was going to retire. He was a successful man. He didn't have to go back to the front lines, Rodriguez Herrada said. It cost him his life. Depicting a Latino was important to the Cuban-American artist because of the disproportionate number of Black and brown people who've died. It will affect you more if you can't stay home, he said of the disease. The immigrant population has borne the brunt of that terrible hardship. We should be giving thanks to them instead of calling ICE. Somos la Luz was temporary. The parking lot has been painted over. The artist was ready to do more, but he didn't find funding. It was just crickets, he said. Nobody was willing to take the next step. The mural lives on online. Rodriguez Herrera said he intends to update his YouTube video as the death toll rises. Other artists have created temporary works they paid for out of pocket and powered with volunteers. In America, How Could This Happen? Susan Brennan Furstenberg's installation of small white flags enumerating the dead closed on November 30th after 6 weeks on and spilling beyond the Armory Parade Ground in Washington, D.C. I created it out of outrage, said Furstenberg over the phone from Bethesda, Maryland. Remember early March when the lieutenant governor of Texas said that elderly people should take one for the team? I was a hospice volunteer for 25 years. Everybody's life has meaning. In August, she saw a headline calling the death toll a statistic and decided that she could not let that stand. I do art to teach people just what these big numbers are, she said. After the initial installation, she and a team of volunteers added flags each day to keep up with the rising tide of the dead. Visitors wrote names and dates of the lost on the flags. People bring their emotions, the names of their loved ones, for public recognition because the deaths are happening in a vacuum, Furstenberg said. But it isn't simply grief these artists are grappling with. It's fury at the inaction of the Trump administration. Young, the memorialist, said there's more than COVID's cruelty to grapple with ahead. Eventually, there will be memorials, he said, but this was a pandemic that became politicized immediately in a horrible way, and that's what we'll remember along with the victims. He sees hope in President-elect Joe Biden. He's a fantastic designated mourner for all of us, Young said. He gets it completely. In November, Young reached out to Los Angeles artist Carla Funderburk, hoping to help her find sites to show her installation Honoring Matter, a memorial for victims of COVID-19. She too created it out of a compulsion to act. I couldn't not do something, watching the news and hearing the numbers tick over, she said. Back in May, she started folding origami cranes to honor the dead. She quickly realized it would take decades to fold so many cranes by herself and enlisted help online. People dropped off cranes in a box she put outside Matter Studio Gallery, where she's founder and director. They mailed them from as far away as Japan and Dubai. First, there were 10, then 300 or 600 at a time, Funderburk said. She created an installation in the gallery, suspending strings of cranes that drifted in the breeze. I had just shy of 8,000 when I broke it down, she said, of the installation. It felt like the full volume of spirits we were losing, casting shadow on top of shadow. Now she has 30,000 cranes, and she's looking for another home for the project. Museums, galleries, storefronts, universities, she said, they're all encouraging, but nobody's willing to hand me a key. Political division, said Rodriguez Herrera, prompts institutional caution. Everybody's in fear right now. Nobody wants to get their head chopped off, he said. Furstenberg sees her installation of white flags as a possibility for an awakening. I want this to be an opportunity for Americans to come out of their foxholes, to look and be shocked together into a different relationship with the pandemic, she said. It has to be a pivot point in how we consider ourselves as Americans. Think of the processions driving by, images of the fallen in Detroit, and bells tolling to mark the 1,500 dead there. Memorials help us integrate loss into our lives. Private or public, they are necessary for healing. COVID's insidious threat is, in a way, a metaphor for the president's denialism. It hems us in like a toxic fog and quashes action. But grief is here, and grieving is called for, or today's trauma will, on some level, never end. I'd like to welcome my guests for today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, and let me introduce them to you. Born and raised in Japan and a resident of New York since 1976, Eiko Otake is a movement-based interdisciplinary artist. She worked for more than 40 years as Eiko and Coma, but since 2014 has been performing her own solo project, A Body in Places, which began with a 12-hour performance at the Philadelphia Amtrak station. Since then, Eiko has performed variations of the project at nearly 80 sites. Let me tell you a little bit more about her work. Between 2014 and 2019, she and photographer historian William Johnston traveled 5 times to post-nuclear meltdown Fukushima and collaborated on creating A Body in Fukushima, an extensive and expanding project that documents places of nuclear contamination with Eiko's body. Eiko has presented both photo exhibitions and film screenings of A Body in Fukushima internationally at museums, art centers, and conferences on environmental disasters. Also in 2017, she launched a multi-year duet project, an open-ended series of cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural, and cross-generational experiments with a diverse range of artists, both living and dead. David Brick is one of her collaborators of the duet project. In January of this year, Eiko traveled to China for a month to work with choreographer Wen Hui, during which the COVID-19 epidemic was identified. And since March, Eiko has been creating works in her virtual studio, which archives her art making and public conversations in the time of the pandemic. Eiko has been honored with a MacArthur Fellowship, the Samuel H. Scripps American Dance Festival Award, and the first Doris Duke Artist Award. For her solo work, she's received a Bessie's Special Citation, an Art Matters Fellowship, the Anonymous Was a Woman Award, and the Sam Miller Award for Performing Arts. Eiko teaches interdisciplinary college courses about the atomic bombings and other environmental issues at Wesleyan University, NYU, Colorado College, and Tokyo University. And during the 2017-18 year, Eiko was a think tank fellow in Wesleyan's College of the Environment. Let me introduce my second guest, and he's a return guest to COVID Calls. We welcome back David Brick. David co-founded Philadelphia's Headlong Dance Theater with Amy Smith and Andros Simonet in 1993. Over the next 2 decades, these three co-founders created over 40 dances as Headlong, performing nationally and internationally. In 2008, David co-founded the Headlong Performance Institute, a training program for creating experimental performance. David collaborates broadly in creating performance, participatory events, and community. His experience of growing up as a hearing member of a deaf family continually influences David's understanding of human bodies as active manifestations of culture. His recent work includes a residency at Dance Place in Washington, D.C. to work on Island of Signs, a performance that explored growing up in a family with 2 languages, one that was shared and one that was not. He shared this residence with Carolyn Brick, his 78-year-old deaf mother, who attended nearby Gallaudet University and was featured in a 1959 documentary about her experience there. David and Eiko, thank you so much for joining me today on COVID Calls.
It's so nice to be here.
I'd like to start the way I usually do, just to find out where you're calling from and how the pandemic is there today. Eiko, can I start with you, please?
Yes, I'm in middle of Manhattan, west side, 2 blocks away from Times Square. And my south end, which is my back windows, now it's dark now, but it's facing south and see the new Trade Center. And beyond that, Statue of Liberty.
And you were back in New York as early as, when were you back in New York, Eiko?
So I was away to Japan to escape what we now consider the worst of April, May of the pandemic. But I stayed there until end of August. And then I came back to both perform and teach in the US. So I've been here since.
I see.
But I was here February, March.
Okay. Well, so then you have those memories that many New Yorkers talk about of hearing the sirens and...
But as I said, I think I had escaped the worst of it because I live in a 2,000 people complex of 2 towers, 4,000 people living. And when the pandemic was first starting, it was very fearful. Also because I'll show you this later, but I was in China starting in January and February with a cruise ship pandemic thing in Japan. So I think the fear factor of it was pretty large in myself, and also the memories of having seen 9/11, 2 towers falling from this very apartment, having survived the AIDS epidemic, which was a very visible pandemic, actually. So I think those memories made me feel I was not sure if I could be mentally stable if I had stayed.
I think we'll probably return to that discussion later when we talk about the reference points that people have to make sense of disaster. Many people do have something in their own lives and their history, and many New Yorkers, of course, have 9/11 as that reference point when they heard sirens like that, or when there were places in the city you couldn't go. Well, David, let me let me welcome you back. And just before you tell us where you are, I want to remind people we had you on July 28th with Ishmael Houston Jones in what was an extraordinary COVID calls, and I hope people will check that out. And on that day, David, there were 148,298 deaths in the United States. We've more than doubled that now since that time. So it's almost in COVID time. It's been 10 years almost. It feels like since I've seen you. How are you? Where are you? And how's it going there?
It's so nice to be back, and it's good to remember. A time is for me, and a lot of people I talk to, is so strange during these months, and it does seem like 10 years ago that Ishmael and I were on the show. We just had a huge snowstorm yesterday. I'm in Philadelphia. I'm on the second floor of my row home in South Philadelphia, I'm in the same room that I've been in since virtually the beginning of the pandemic. I probably spend 10 hours a day in this room, and it weighs on me. It weighs on me that I've come to think, this is a choreographic thought, that traveling across geographic space is really does something to thinking and perception, right? So now I have a practice of making sure, I do some kind of walking across, my neighborhood, at least once a day. But that's been an interesting thing about space, about being kind of like in a place, feeling stuck in a place that's not changing large scales of space. I would say since the last time I was here, I was just remembering how Ishmael and I talked about this question, like what's happening in your city. And we talked a lot about who's taking the pandemic seriously and masking seriously. And I will say that now, everyone I see is always wearing a mask, and before it was a little mixed in July. And now when I go out, everyone I pass on the sidewalk is wearing masks. So that's a change. I feel like it's an anxious moment because the snowstorm has along with the kind of increase in numbers, the skyrocketing numbers, has meant that I think we all are worried about not we all, but a lot of people I talk to are just concerned about the next few months. I have a 9-year-old, and the sense of claustrophobia and the sense of that there's just there's still a ways to go.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting to hear you talk about the need to travel, to walk, and I think about this for artists. I think about this also for anybody who's writing. I think about historians. When I get together with historians in Zoom land, we lament the fact that we can't go into an archive. There are these places we're used to going to, taking in input, and even the walk to and from a library or to and from an archive is an experience that I will never ever discount again as an important part of just a normal thinking process for me. And I say that, of course, with enormous respect for people who haven't had the ability to be at home in this time, the essential workers who are out there and probably would trade my quandary for theirs. But nevertheless, it's real. And, I feel that's probably also one of the things we may talk about today is how this pandemic has shaped your practice. Because this is not a 1 or 2 month interruption of your practice. This is a new way of practice. So why don't we start, talking a little bit about the work that you've been doing. And I'm going to make just so people watching, I'm going to be moving back and forth between a couple of browsers here. So I'm going to leave you visually, and I'm going to rejoin you in audio. And you guys go ahead and start talking, and don't mind me, and I'll rejoin you in 1 second.
Thank you. So as I said, 2020 was a stressful year for everyone, and I think we all remember this worldwide, whatever the age we are. But my 2020 started arriving to Beijing for a 1 month stay to work with my friend, whom I know for a long time, Wen Fei, a prominent contemporary choreographer and interdisciplinary artist. So together we have a fellowship for me to be in China for 1 month, and she was to come here for 1 month in August. So the latter did not happen. So instead, and there's not a very fast, too soon prospect that she can come back. So instead, we had been meeting every week, more than once often, to edit the videos that we have shot during the time. So I wanted to show you a very short video of on January 20th. This is already close to 3 weeks into my stay in China. And I did not know about COVID, coronavirus epidemic. Just we heard something was happening, but we didn't know how serious it was. And it was supposed to be really minor. So I was teaching a workshop in Nanjing. We traveled from Beijing to Nanjing, and I was teaching a workshop. So this is a little footage of what I did not know. And if I knew, now I know, at that point, how already the coronavirus was out there, I could not possibly do the workshop in the way I did. So it's a little bit emotional for me to share this with you. Scott, could you please play?
Okay, let's get this here. All right.
Make your body available to your grandma. This I might remember.
这是我的记忆。
This, if you are busy, you don't remember. Not shape. It's dream, memory. A little bit longer, more. Dream is gone. You wait, you rest, you feel, and you continue to do until maybe some dream. Walk together with your invisible grandma.
跟你的这个看不见的奶奶一起走。
How do you walk with your grandma who is dead? So that was a little short clip, and David and myself both teach, and we take a great pleasure of creating a time that participant can share both body and mind, and intimacy is an extremely important content and a tool for us to begin to feel what body does in our mind and how we can relate to others. So of course I have not taught this way since, and obviously I've been teaching in Zoom. But in the last clip, I'm talking about you are with grandma. You remember, your body remembers how your grandma and you are close. Now she's dead. Do you remember? This I'm saying without any notion of this pandemic, soon to become pandemic, was happening. So this is something I've been working on, like how to consider the possible and inevitable death, either to the family or to yourself, and in a way of thinking about movement at work or a movement-based way of thinking. So I would like to continue.
Eiko, do you mind if I just comment? You know, when Scott invited Eiko and I to do this show, Eiko and I who had been in very close contact up until the pandemic started, and then we hadn't really been had much contact over the course of the pandemic. And so when we thought part of the conversation we could have today was a kind of sharing with each other, like what's been going on for the past 10 months for each of us. And I just want to say, like, seeing that clip it's overwhelming and shocking because of the human beings touching each other, and the sensuality and people in a room together. And it's like just not part of my life and, and our lives anymore. And it does feel like another era, even though it's, totally normal for us. So it's very moving to see that.
And remember, David, you and I used to do those dances together. We would do like talking and dancing and moving and talking again, moving while we are talking, etc., etc. So, I was doing that in China until that night. This particular workshop is memorable to me because it was that night I found out this epidemic is a significant one. And therefore, from that next day on, that would not have been possible. And then the rest of the stay was very much finding out more and more of that information. But before we go there, it was for choreographers and movement-based artists, our ability to be able to feel intimacy between each other and how we can communicate, sometimes even without talking, is so important to us.
Right.
Luckily, we remember that. So even though we cannot do it now, we remember how we do it, and we can return to it, right? And if this goes on too long, for younger people, it's much harder because we had decades of practicing that ourselves. So being deprived of it now, we know what we are missing, at least, right? I want to remind, I'm always, even over teaching Zoom, and we can do a lot over Zoom, and I become better at it. But I think it's important to acknowledge what we are also missing and what was possible.
Yeah.
Before, right?
Yeah.
So, continuing with this workshop feeling is that myself and Wenfei just again moving as and participating to the workshop. And Scott, if you can do the sound directly sharing from your computer, that might be better, and keep the pointer out of that screen. That will keep it better. Thank you.
Continue, but take a few minutes to become two trees really together.
So often collaboration is an interdependence, and it is also to help each other's thinking and sensitivity. So I would like continue to honor that and how to do that even during the pandemic. And are you teaching, David, now this semester or not, right?
No, we postponed. Normally, I direct a program called the Headlong Performance Institute, and artists of all ages actually come, meaning all ages, meaning adult ages. So generally from mid-20s up to, we have applicants who are my age and have children. But, often they're people in the mid to late 20s. And we do a residency and training program, and we canceled it for the fall. And we have designed a hybrid program for the spring, which I could talk about later. But I've been in conversation with the artists who are really hungry. Part of the reason why we decided to go ahead and do a kind of online / socially distanced program was because so many artists were being in touch with us and just really hungry for the support, for a community of inquiry around their work and their practice. So we're going to start it. We're going to do it starting in late February.
Right, and I did teach in your institute. You have invited me more than a few times. So I look forward, to continue to collaborate with you, both as a duet project format, but also beyond, that we both are very eager to teach. And during the pandemic, I even become more aware how much we have to be willing to offer to the younger generation, because more we offer, the more they eat. And then by being eaten, I really feel I'm learning their mind.
Yes.
And the same is true. I think I was really glad I was in China nearly 1 month, even though I had to cut my visit short. Because after this Nanjing, and that night I found out about, oh, this is serious. All of a sudden, everybody seems to know, even though until the day before, not many people knew about this. All of a sudden, people's friends are texting each other. All those new photos are coming in, short videos are coming in. I'm talking about the night in Nanjing, in January 20th. And then Wenfei and I flew to Kunming, which is her hometown, because as you may already, and viewers may already have heard this, Chinese New Year is that's the most important thing for family to get together. So it's reminiscent of here, Thanksgiving, COVID number went up high after the Thanksgiving, right? So people are really traveling to see their families and have a big meal. By the time we arrived to Kunming, there was already a COVID in Kunming. And so we went to a national park, really out of the way, to be safer and to be able to continue to work. However, even that place soon began to work. The entire national park system had closed. So we kind of have to lock ourselves in a hotel room. And even though they reserved a fancy New Year's Eve meal in a restaurant, we couldn't really do that. And I was very impressed by my friend Wenfei's first decisions. Okay, now we are epidemic. We have to behave differently. And I was kind of finding out the way they move so fast is one of the reasons, not only the government, but also the people, because they had SARS and they had other experiences of quite a number of disasters in their own histories. So I would like to show you, this is New Year's Eve, that we would have had a very fancy dinner somewhere else, but we are stuck in a hotel room and seeing the national TV. Please go. We are in an emergency. We are eating noodles. With Wenfei's mom, Wenfei and cucumber with a special sauce. And this is Wenfei's brother. We cannot go to the restaurant. Yes, because it's emergency. We think this is much safety. 酒店也不能接客了。请注意经过下的坡路段，前方1公里直行。Doing a New Year's Eve special meal. Yes. But today and this week we are in an emergency with the virus. She's washing all the dishes with alcohol, strong alcohol. 将迎来决胜全面小康决战脱贫攻坚的历史时刻。新年好，新年好，新年好！所有中国人关切的目光和温暖的支持，坚定信心，就是抗击疫情最好的疫苗。众志成城，也绝不给感染别人提供可能。您的安静过年会帮助我们所有人平安。您安全了，14亿人都安全了。So I remember that night, the being family together. I am joining their family, and they're addressing, the TV is addressing in a very heroic manner that we are having this difficulty, we'll conquer this. Meanwhile, we are getting much more serious looking internet information. My friend from America is calling me to get out. My family from Japan is calling me to get out. Flight is being canceled, and that's what TV was showing. And I ended up just 2 days later, my son found a flight. And like at that point, it wasn't so much as I was fearful about me getting sick. I was so stressed out that my friends and my families are so worried about me. And when Faye was also stressed out, as she's having me as a guest. So we kind of found a flight, and we quickly, within 10 minutes, that we had to decide we can go because airport is 2.5 hours away. So this is a short documentary.
Eiko, can I just a quick to make sure I'm reading the visual correctly? So you're in this hotel room. Normally you would be having a fancy meal somewhere, but instead you're like you have some grocery items and you're eating and then on the TV in the hotel room is this big, broadcast celebration going on, and they are referring to the epidemic that has begun in Wuhan, and those are pictures from Wuhan that's happening. And so as you're watching that, Wenhui is like realizing that a very serious epidemic is happening in China.
And not so much on what TV is showing. It's more like meanwhile TV is showing this, other people are also sending like online only information. That was much more serious. So this was very tender and scary, as like the situation is changing every second. This like kind of curve of the seriousness is not like same. It goes all the way, just like start to really accelerate. And I get this sense of unknown fear. And, as everybody is also calling me. So this is just a way that we are actually rushing to the airport. Please play.
Don't forget everything. 1月26号中午，从埃克去机场的路上，现在我和我哥哥开车送艾蔻去昆明的长水机场。现在很紧急时刻，现在马上他要从昆明直接飞到大阪。我哥哥 I see you in America or in Japan or in China. Okay, thank you. 谢谢。Thank you. Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. You're very nice. Your mom nice. I love you guys. Thank you.
So I was a crying baby, just we so bonded being together every minute of our 1 month, nearly 1 month. And they had to really cut it only by several days, but that chaos. And I think in my history, this might be the first time, except maybe 9/11 was a big shock, of course. And of course, Fukushima, when that had happened, was a very big shock, right? But at least in Fukushima one, I was not proximate. I was in New York. And 9/11 was just as big a shock. But this one, the pandemic really was so common everywhere. But in China, where I felt like I didn't really have access to the way that I'm used to having the information, yet so much was all of a sudden flooding to my knowledge that I did not know exactly what to trust, what not to trust, and I had to make decisions. Yeah.
I can't look at that footage without thinking about the incredible demonization of China and Chinese people that was going on in this country. And then you just see you hugging and having communion with ordinary people. That's very heartfelt or very concerned, there's something very moving about seeing that footage, just because of the incredible like China demonization that was going on in this country, you know.
Yeah.
And then there's also these layers, as seeing you as a Japanese person having communion with Chinese people because of all of the, not just the US Chinese history, but the Chinese Japanese history.
Yeah.
That's very moving.
In fact, you just touched it. You know, I was actually in Nanjing, right, for the workshop. And actually, the reason I went to Nanjing was originally to go to a Nanjing Masakyo Museum, which is really a beyond disaster. That's a war crime, right, by Japanese military. And I had to learn that. I knew about it, but I really wanted to make sure that I had a way of learning how they memorize that, how they mourn that. And I wanted to be there. We also went to the Comfort Women Station. You know, Comfort Women is actually a term, it's pretty wrong. It's a brothel, and it's a sex slave. So those things are historically so important. And from a Japanese point of view, the government are not trying to attend to it, and Chinese government are really trying to attend to it. So really, again, who is going to memorize in what way, and you know, what is accountability, and how we memorize it is a very important concern. And I think that the 2020, with this pandemic and with other violences also happening, relationship to the pandemic is going to be a major things that we'll be thinking a very long time. So you were in Italy, right? When was it you were in Italy?
I mean, it turns out in December, late December, all the way up till, you know, just before the New Year, my family was in Italy. We were at a memorial for a friend, a kind of a memorial celebration that was taking place for a friend whose husband had passed in the previous year. And after we left, the group of people who stayed got very sick. And in retrospect, they began to speculate that they had COVID at that time. They'd gone to Rome and had been really, the plans for the rest of the group were shot because people were so sick.
Right. And I think the way...
It was exactly this time a year ago.
Right. And the way that, you know, I came back to Japan, I escaped to China, I came to Japan, and I was in Japan short time, and then I came back to America, and I was in this apartment in March. And I think the way we are looking at what was happening in Italy made us really realize, oh, this is coming. So what we were looking in the number of New York City, I remember, and again, I'm doing the same thing as I was doing in China, like just looking at number, almost like every other hour, I'm looking at a number, and the number is really like going up. And I think knowing already like how hospitals really couldn't handle in Italy, and all that really gave us a lot of fear, which then became exactly the case, right? So I ended up, as I was rehearsing here in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, that I had a show at the end of March, and that did not get cancelled for a long time. And so I was rehearsing, continued to rehearse. I was continued to be in a subway, and all of a sudden it was cancelled. And I realized, oh, what's going on here? I mean, I knew, but the sense of the real danger right in here, in this right in apartment, right on the street, right on the subway, had become very prominent. So I left for Japan. And I was very disoriented at that point. Just like being here, as I said, you know, I said to my student, you know, for us, this pandemic makes us all together unknowing. I don't know any better than 21 years old. But we have different memories. Not to say 21 years old do not have. We just have a longer decade, and more so with the older friends. So my older friends remember the Second World War. So for me, my remembrance most strongly associated by being here and locked in kind of was 9/11 and AIDS pandemic. So that was very much a reason of my running away to Japan. But I was very lucky. Having arrived in Japan, I already had an invitation to create a virtual studio. So part of the reason I was so unstable was all my performances being canceled. And the performer prepare the show knowing 2 months from now, I'm going to go that place, and that's gone. 3 months from now, I'm going to that place, that's gone. And within a very short period of the time, for everyone, everything got pretty much canceled out. So I was sitting here thinking, oh, it's the first time I have no plan to be in front of the people. So, writers, painters, they're very used to working alone. But we work in communication, we work in collaboration, we work with staff, we work with tech crews. All of a sudden, that entire system we've been working had kind of crumbled down.
I mean, we were supposed to be working together right now, actually. Exactly. We were supposed to find out about a grant for this project, your duet project, and Headlong's Practicing to Die project, which we took a phrase from you. And Headlong was about to get funded. We were at the final stages of getting funding, and we would have started working together in September, August, September, and then we were going to work again in January, and that funding got pulled, and the project's on hold,
Yeah.
and we're not visiting each other or talking to each other except for now.
So arriving in Japan, I was in quarantine, of course, and during the quarantine, I began to edit my material that I already had, and this one that I want to show you briefly is the kind of example that being quarantined was very much affecting the model and the mood of the, yes, please go. And then you can actually, Scott, you can play the next one right away. I just say one sentence. And then I also began to work not only just editing, but also working over Zoom. So like me in Japan and my collaborators, whether they are in Manhattan or Brooklyn or elsewhere in the whole world. So this is just a short part of that, my experiment working on Zoom. So now you and I can do this over Zoom dancing.
That's amazing. So you two are looking at each other.
Yes, very much.
And dancing through Zoom. Yes. I mean, it's very moving, and I'll just underscore you look at the touching that was going on in the beginning, in the workshop that you're doing, and then now you're working on Zoom, trying to make these visual connections through this digital Netherland. Amazing.
Yeah. And so how I think we should, because now time is running out very quickly. So do you want to do you want to tell me what you've been kind of being up to during those times that I was creating those things?
I can't. You don't want to show your seagulls? I think Scott said we can go late if
Okay, fine. Let's
have.
do the figure. Okay. So
I just have to say I just like love, thinking about how we adapt our artistic processes to this time. Eiko, you've been like incredibly prolific and working this whole time, even though your whole plan of how you were supposed to be working has been totally upended. And so I feel like what you've done over the last 10 months is also a kind of a metaphor for how artistic practices shifted for so many of us, right? So from touching bodies together in a common space to like working across this digital divide and trying to figure out how to be embodied and connected across that to this visual art kind of which sort of like like no bodies at all, just, except these bird bodies, which I read as a metaphor for my body, for our body. So yeah, I would love to see
so
this. And as a choreographer, it's just a different. It's a different modality.
I can joke about this is my choreographed piece, and of course I didn't choreograph birds, but by then I couldn't really like work with people. So nobody stops me if I'm shooting birds and literally manipulating the time, little time that birds fly, right? And how by manipulating time I can see the details more closely. And then I realized, just as many people do, in a time of the difficulty, we also project our good and not so good humanity onto other beings, like little stories, right? We look at the birds and we still see our hardships, human hardships, and human will to survive into the birds, even the fierceness. So this is a short clip. I mean, this is much shorter than, real piece. Real piece is quite a bit longer, but still, I was actually creating shorter pieces because everybody was becoming, by then was kind of becoming Zoom busy. So now I wasn't really thinking about, let me join to the internet choreography, internet dance distribution. I wasn't really feeling that way. I really was thinking, let me make something now that I can make. And that could be a witnessing, that would be surviving, that would be just art practice during this particular time. And that can be shown in a real place and in real time in a physical proximity to the real audience.
Nice to see you again, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. You're very distinguished backstage.
I've been here, but just very happily queuing up these videos, and I just want to make one quick reminder that people are watching COVID calls, and today we're talking about choreography and art making in the time of pandemic with Eiko, Otake, and David Brick. And one little comment I want to make, and then David, I think we'd both love to hear what you've been doing is just how struck I am. And David, you said this a minute ago too, so I'm really just stealing your idea, but you've captured already the life of the working artist, which is a lot of travel. When things are going right, it's a lot of travel, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of interaction with people, it's a lot of closeness. And then to see you so quickly pivot to making this other work, I just think that placing those two videos side by side, the first one when you're working in China, and the second one when you're doing the Zoom improvisation.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to process that yet. I have to spend some time with that, but I think that is a really important, and there'll need to be a third one where you return to that studio in China and resume that work,
Yes.
I suppose, if it's possible to, or even if you want to. I mean, we do make these assumptions that that's what we want to get back to.
Yeah.
But David, it's something that you and I talked with Ishmael a lot about over the summer, is there's a lot of things we maybe shouldn't be in such a hurry to get back to. I think closeness and art making with people is certainly probably one of them, but I don't know if we can recapture that. So it's been inspirational just watching those videos, and I'll stop there. And Eiko, if you want to say anything, and then David, let's turn it to you.
Yes, and David knows this really well, and David has been very supportive. I've been working with Fukushima matter. So as you know, the Fukushima, and Scott, you know this very well. So, there's a nuclear, I wouldn't call it accident, nuclear disaster, starting 2011, March 11, and moving forward and still going on. So I've been there 5 times with a historian photographer, William Johnston. So I can't bring audience to Fukushima, but I was performing. So I was already starting, and even before, if I cannot perform for the audience in Fukushima, I can perform and I can bring Fukushima with me to the audience. And by the time people see either the photos or videos, it becomes another kind of a performance. So I believe in that. In another way, not just live performance is a performance. Whenever the artist creates something and audience watch it very carefully with a lot of intention, and their mind get moved, I think that becomes performance. And so that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, how in a way, like working on that. So for people who don't know, Eiko has traveled to Fukushima, the site of the nuclear disaster brought on by a tsunami in 2011 in Japan, and the place is evacuated. It's radiation filled and unlivable, and she's put her body in that landscape, and with William Johnston taking pictures of her body in that landscape. She's created a series of photos and videos that is a performance brought into this realm of, a digital realm, a visual realm, but it is still an embodied realm, embodied work, very, very deeply. And so I hadn't realized how you have been preparing for this disaster in the, from the seeds of that disaster.
I don't claim I've been prepared, but I think we know, 3 of us know, and almost everybody who is not young know, pandemic is in a way is not surprise. 9/11 in a way was not surprise. Right. Fukushima meltdowns were not at all surprise. Everybody kind of knew this was to happen. We just did not know which plan when.
I know. Let me just tag one thing onto that also, which is that those disasters are not over.
No.
The nuclear disaster certainly, I mean, materially is not over.
And in fact, this is during this pandemic, government and TEPCO are also giving dumping the contaminated water into the ocean, because it's much less noisy people become because we are so consumed by the pandemic. And this is extremely dangerous.
So you have that temporality moving along. And I had a chance to speak with John Feel, who's an advocate for September 11 for workers, firefighters and workers. He was a steel worker who was injured on the job. And we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of September 11.
Exactly.
The numbers of people who are dying of respiratory distress continues to grow. And so there you have this ongoing, this continuity of the disaster. And so I think that also, Eiko, I'm curious to know from you and also from you, David, to what degree the continuation of those disasters manifests itself in work. Because, I think we have this notion that writers and artists, choreographers, they're reacting to something oh, there's a war, so they wrote a book about a war. But that's not how art works. That's not how our minds work. We react to everything that we've accumulated in this space, and then everything else we can read and experience about it third hand, second hand, third hand from others. I'm fascinated with that accumulation.
Yeah, that's what I mean when I talked about other pandemic that we had experienced. But to me, is we knew humans fail. We knew we are creating something we can't handle. So just a nuclear plant as a one good example. When it fails, it's extremely hard to handle it. And in fact, it is shockingly unprepared to handle it. And it's extremely dangerous for the people trying to fix it too. And we can't quite fix it. It's an environmental disaster, right? And those things were never without a warning. I mean, like Trade Center had the bombing several years prior to that. And that was big enough. But we managed to sort of cover up, or at least not uncover it, to get more warning than it actually deserves. Same thing with Fukushima. This is not at all the first nuclear accident. There were many actually, and some were bigger than the other. And Fukushima and Chernobyl were, of course, were bigger. But we pretend as if, oh, this was a big surprise. No, it's not a big surprise. And that part is so important to me. And to me, it's also like, many things we create imitate a human being because we are only human, right? And human beings always die. We always get sick. We always get injury. So everything we create, of course, will have an injury. Of course, it will die eventually. When people buy little phone, nobody thinks this is going to last forever. Everybody knows this is going to fail at that one point. This is granted. But for some reason, we go as there to have such an amazingly complex and horribly dangerous things as nuclear plants, and we create. And somehow, industries had always persuaded and actually buy out the people who had been fearful about it. Yeah. It's a lot of money going into the community to make it happen.
I think that's, I was trying to, that sense of iteration and repetition is what I was trying to get at by talking about how, as an artistic practice, as like developing resilience and new technologies of response to the situation of the world, like I just found it very, just in terms of this thing that things repeat, that things go on, that there's a slow unfolding of disasters of all kinds that continue to happen. And this is, Scott, I'm stealing a way of framing things that you are so eloquent about.
I'm pretty sure I stole that from watching Eiko and your work, David, so it's okay.
Great. We all back. But yeah, so I think I was reading, and Eiko, I think you mentioned it. Like Japan was dumping a lot of the water, the radiation-filled water from the plant recently, because the distraction of the current disaster creates an opportune moment to do something where people's attention is elsewhere. So that's a kind of a dark repetition of disaster. But also the fact that you're like, as an artist, how do I speak? How do I bear witness to Fukushima for the world who can't go there, right? And so you begin to use photography and video in terms of, and that's quite innovative. Like to be like, I'm going to take my body to this place that is off limits and dangerous, but I'm going to document it, and then I'm going to bring that documentation back as a performance. I find that very innovative, and I do think in terms of, Scott, your question about how things unfold over time, there's something in there. There's something in there, like about resilience and innovation, not for innovation's sake, but it's like thoughtful response. Like we develop skills in one context, and that is learning for another context. That is inevitable, I guess.
We hope
But
so.
they
We hope
think,
we hope there's learning. But what I worry about is that there's these artificial boundaries that are imposed that we call a disaster, and we say
right.
it's over. But I think it's also why we absolutely must have works. Some of them scientific, but I really feel most of them need to be artistic, that intentionally confound our sense of disasters being able to be over and packaged. And this is a critique I share with many of my colleagues who are in the disaster research realm, is we have long been seduced by the idea that disasters move in a cycle and therefore there's a closure point. And rather than thinking of them as a continuity that's nonlinear, and these concepts, to the extent that they're transferable across mathematics and science and history and art, that's the convergence that I find so important about both of your work and what you're discovering right now. I think we should, David, should we give you a chance to
I can share, yeah. I'll testify a little bit about my experience. Yeah. And I think it's it's quite a contrast, Eiko, with your experience, and maybe I'll just frame it briefly. There's like two themes I think I would kind of frame about my experience as a human and an artist this past 10 months. The first theme I would talk about is the direct concern for the most vulnerable people in my life. So my parents, who are in their 80s, and not being able to see them, I intentionally live in the same city that they live in, so I can be close to them during this time of their life. But we can't spend time together because it's so dangerous for them. And at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'll just say, like, my family's deaf, my parents are deaf. Being physical is really important. Although it does give us an advantage that I'll speak to in a second. Something very special about sign language that is good for these times. At the beginning of the pandemic, their assisted care facility was not responding well, and was forcing them to eat in a group cafeteria, and was like penalizing them, by charging them extra if they refused to go to the dining room and stuff. So my brothers and I, sort of desperate and kind of very forcefully got them out of that facility for as long as we could afford to have them in another place. So we rented a place in Maryland that was in a horse farm, and we're incredibly privileged that we were able to do that for a few months. And then we couldn't afford it anymore, and they went back to the place. But by then, that place had, because of state mandates, they'd started delivering meals to people's rooms and insisting that people not gather. And so, they're okay. But thinking about, am I going to see them, has been a big theme of the past 10 months. And we do gather now outdoors, and we can stay far apart and use sign language to speak with each other. And we don't, all of the kind of, I can't understand, I think especially older people, but I'm hard of hearing myself, the masks just make it impossible to understand for many of us what anybody else is saying. So, but we're able to use sign language, and that's nice. And the other anecdote that I'll share, that's, I'm not sure exactly what it means, but it's about adaptation and silver linings. So in the beginning, when my daughter was, her school was just canceled for a while, and so she was at home, and then my parents volunteered to give her sign language lessons over Zoom. Right, so it's very hard for, I've failed miserably at teaching my Safi is her name, teaching Safi sign language, because she's impatient with it, and I'm impatient with it. So for the first time, she began to spend time with my parents one-on-one, talking with them, because it was almost like a kind of babysitting that was going on. I'd set her up with Zoom in the other room and for an hour. And in the beginning, I would check in and make sure. And then, you know, after a few days, they were like, go away, don't come back. And they would spend 2 or 3 hours like talking to each other on the Zoom, and Safi really getting close to them in a way she'd never had before. I was not mediating that relationship, and she was learning sign language, and you know, so that I just share that. She has also been, she was 8, she turned 9 during the pandemic. And I would just say it's just like I've been terrified about her at this incredibly important age, like how everything is constrained on her physically. And, you know, I'm a dancer, a choreographer. I believe in how important it is to relate to other bodies and to actually move. And there's just nothing in our flow that makes that happen. You know, like she's on a computer literally all day, every day, because her school is remote. And her socialization, she's a very social child. Seems kind of perverse to me, you know, like she's like channeled into these very narrow kinds of interactions through Zoom, through FaceTime, and with her friends, and not developing new friends. You know, there's like a kind of an end of developing new friendships, right? And so all of this has been I'd just say it's been a big part of my concern. So I think there was one week this summer where her best friend, who's the child of a dance artist who I've worked with a lot, and we're very, very close friends, our families are close friends, where we got tested and we decided to pod. We thought we were going to be able to pod longer, but we couldn't pod. It only lasted a week for complicated circumstances. But for this one week in July, we came together, and it was a revelation. Like literally the first time we walked into a house and we're in the same space as other people, and we cooked together and we ate together, I literally started crying, you know, when I started to feel like, oh wait, I can't get close to you. No, we can get close to each other, and we can hug each other, and we can just relax and play backgammon and cook meals and eat meals. And I feel privileged to have that experience. So I'm just going to share a poem about Safi in particular, and her friend Iris. So my daughter's name is Saffron, her friend's name is Iris, and they disappeared for the week. They disappeared with each other into a room, and they just, you know, like I found that distressing, you know, like, why aren't you running around outside? You know, we can all be together. Let's go outside. But they really like went further into a room together and just clung to each other for a week. So I'm gonna read a poem. This is my performance, because I have not been dancing very much. So this is my art. Lebanon, Pennsylvania. 90 degrees outside, but this air makes you forget. Still explosions of pink fireworks kissing us with soft breath from the Persian silk tree. We float together as on a life raft, this wooden deck, uncautious at last. Saffron and Iris are inside, hiding out. Months of quarantine leading to this, reunion and doubling down in a fever of 9-year-old ecstasy or rebellion. Deep inside the house, they shun us, clung together in the smallest room forever. Their hyper quarantine, not ours. The cool smooch of woods doesn't do it, but the gloaming light finally moves them, because fireflies, their slow green blinks, running after June bugs through the darkening grass, like I did in summers long ago, fevered summers not so long ago. So that's my that's my homage to being concerned.
So I think family and friends has become ever more important. And like right now, as you were saying, I've been working like a maniac. And one of the reasons is there's a lot of regret on my end that, oh, you know, how, as we talked, you know, there are so many things we knew and that happened and we were not prepared. So me, my kids are already grown, my parents are already dead. So it made me be able to really work as much as possible without having that. But still, I think the intimacy and the care between us become extremely important. And I do not do it now, but I did perform at the end of September, and that was just 2 performances in this entire year. And then I'm realizing for many of the people, it really wasn't just to see me. It was really just to be together because it was a very safe outdoor social distance observed performances. So there was something about I reconfirmed how the performance in a contemporary society is not only for the art's sake. Art is there, of course, and I hope so, but it is also gives a place and time that we can experience together and see something together and talk about it and make that recognition together. So I do honor our community and I do honor audience's willingness to see, you know, performing artists' ways of working, no matter in a different circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of wanted to gloss one other thing because it feels so, this experience that I've had, which is so much about the fragility of the grassroots arts community. So I'll just start by saying that the #1 funder of art in the United States is the day job of artists. You know, so like the reason art happens in the United States is not because of foundation and commissions and producers. It's because most artists have gig jobs and service economy jobs and temporary jobs, and they support themselves to make their work. And so I'm the director of a small nonprofit arts organization, Headlong Dance Theater, as a service organization, as well as an organization that creates performance pieces. And we have programs that support artists. So the big work that I've been doing over the last 10 months is trying to make sure that Headlong stays in place. We have a building with 2 studios and artist apartments. We have another studio that's a textile design studio. And every week I was meeting with my board over in the late spring to be like, are we going to fold the company? You know, can we figure this out to keep going so that the spaces are intact for when people can convene again and rehearse again. And also we provide a fiscally sponsored services for a whole bunch of amazing artists. And we do this training program. We have a large alumni community and we provide a lot of support. So just trying to keep the organization open and being an administrator who's doing that work. And I'm proud that we've paid everybody, all the artists who work in Headlong, we've continued to pay them during this time. And so far we've kept the organization open. I'm putting a link in. So this link is to Headlong's recent fundraisers. It describes our programs. And you know, this is, instead of dancing, I've been doing this work, you know, to make sure there's something for the grass arts performance community to come back to. So I just wanted to gloss that because I think that is the experience of so many artists right now. Is they're moving out of their apartments, you know, and kind of moving into like larger group living situations because they can't afford their rent, because they don't have jobs. They're making $150 every 2 weeks from, you know, some like online gig that they can hook up that's temporary. So, you know, I felt important to point at that.
That fragility is something that I've heard. I talked with Kurt Braunohler, who's a great comedian. I talked with Ray Foffer, who's one of the innovators of a company that actually allows musical performances. It started as a company where they bring artists into people's homes, and now they've adapted that to have sort of more intimate Zoom performances. I'm just seeing so many artists across the spectrum. First, realizing how fragile the infrastructure is, and then second, adapting. I haven't heard anyone who said, well, I guess that's it for me. I mean, and there probably are, and we're probably not hearing about them right now. We won't know about that attrition for a while, but that desire to adapt, I think that's some of the most important work that's happening right now, because people absolutely rely on those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this is something, it's important to acknowledge that the essential workers, the scientists making the vaccines, all of the infrastructure of that, which also has been a lot more fragile than I thought it was.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
But that's important, and we celebrate that. But if all of a sudden comedy clubs and dance theaters and dance festivals and movie and film, you know, series and things like that, if they're broken down a year or two, it takes a while to build that infrastructure back up. And that's been something that's really concerning me. And again, heartens me about what you're both doing, but I also see the stress and strain and hear it in your voices and just in this conversation.
But, you know, this is true, and I'm just as concerned because this is my field. At the same time, there may be a good learning experience because, you know, like maybe some of the very big productions, as if like everything is fine in the world, may have to have a questioning. You know, there may be a way we can do that just as deep and moving artwork without having that whole big aspect, right? There may be something that we may be questioning right now that can linger. Even post-pandemic, which post-pandemic means it's like it's a before another pandemic too, or another disaster. We never end that cycle in a way, right? We know the earthquake is happening again. We know tsunami is happening again. We know we are making these humongous things that we cannot fix. So I think this whole recognition of it now might serve us in a way of even much more careful and much more reflective in what we do. Not just like, oh, we'd like to do it, therefore we do it. I think there might be some different system, different question mark, different sense of hesitation that is not stopping what we do. And we cannot change who we are, but we can perhaps change the way we do things.
Yeah, and I think there's, you know, Eiko you and I were talking about how through your teaching, you've really been able to kind of get a feel for how some younger people are processing and experiencing this time and how important that is.
Yeah.
And to see that, to you know, I would say for me, it's been an honor to get to have, one of the things I've had is contact with the artists who are interested in coming to this new version of HPI that's going to be online and hybrid for people who are in Philadelphia. There will be some socially distanced gathering that is able to happen too. But to talking to these artists, and people are on fire to make work. I mean, this is definitely a moment that calls for art. You know, it calls for art to name what's going on, to work in the unknown. You know, this is the work that our artists are good at. It's like it's juggling the unknown and finding direction in the unknown, and naming what's happening and also imagining other possibilities. And the artists I've been, you know, fortunate to talk to, there's just an incredible fire about making during this time and excited. Yeah. And And I will just say, I mean, this is a whole nother kind of conversation, but in terms of like creating a world that's better than the one that we left behind, some old things are crumbling that will never come back, you know, and I do feel like not being able to gather in a studio, for example, has really made it clear how much consensus and exclusion is built into the practice of like, we go into a studio and, you know, and work together, you know, which is, there are other ways to come together. There's other ways to work. There's other ways to support, you know, to convene a community of inquiry and take advantage of real differences among the people in that community so that artists are making work not just for a consensus, but for specific and other communities, right, that are very different one from another. And I feel like there's beautiful things, like, you know, the kind of the ghosts of the 20th century are like, some of them are settling down and fading away, you know, in this moment, you know.
I just want to underline one aspect of that is deep-pocketed institutions like universities. I've had mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, I've expected universities to rise to the occasion a little bit more in terms of more outreach for community, and in terms of the classes. But universities have been, I think, very hesitant for all of the financial pressures that are on them to somehow use this moment and the distance learning. I feel like we could have had a distance learning revolution, and I'm not seeing it. Now, let me say that, but let me also say, what I've seen among many people I know who are faculty in the United States and other countries, in terms of going well beyond the bounds of the kind of work that they would ordinarily be rewarded for, is inspiring. And what I see in nursing schools and public health schools is absolutely blowing my mind right now. I mean, you know, so even, you know, David, I'm agreeing with you that we won't, maybe we want to really take a good hard look at what we want to go back to. And I think Eiko was talking about that as well in terms of arts infrastructure, deep-pocketed arts infrastructure. And in some ways, maybe it's not surprising that those structures, the heaviest lifting of them are and the well-funded ones of them are pretty resilient. But there are still, people are learning in this time, I feel like. I do think there's going to be an innovation that comes out in education and in arts of this moment. It's just too early to know what that's gonna look like.
Yeah. So as I said, we are creating now, but we are also creating for the future, but we are also remembering what was before. This is a longer time span, and all those things happening in front of us, really we can kind of see it, how we can be looking back, or how we can use this occasion to even look back long before that. I am very interested in to use my body to look up the time that is in before my body. Because it is a continuous. Yeah. You know, it's not like all of a sudden world began to crumble. No. I think there was a huge arc and the belief system of all we will always progress. And I don't believe so. So that's a real hard look. That doesn't mean we should all like, you know, cry out. But I think the hard look of not anymore believing, we just wait until the things will be better.
Right. I just want to make sure people also know that Eiko's work, A Body in Fukushima, will arrive as a book in the spring of next year, 2021, to coincide with the 10th anniversary, I'm sure. And we will be so eager to see that and to see the work that I'm sure you're making to go along with that, the sets of memorial practices that will accompany that. And David, just as we're closing here, thank you for sharing that poem, by the way. I'm jealous that you can both dance and write poetry. I can barely talk into a microphone, not to mention write a history lecture. So that's really impressive. What else can you share with us, kind of maybe some other things to watch for from Headlong?
Well, I'm really excited about this convening that's going to happen in February with artists, this residency and training program that's going to happen in this new, I think, radically inclusive format. Like that's really been our kind of organizing idea. Now that so I'm looking forward to that, and there'll be work that is coming out of that artist, and we'll find forums to share that with the public. Headlong's main work right now is actually inspired by something that Eiko said to me. We call the project "Practicing to Die," and that was named this before the pandemic happened, because Eiko was talking about this phase of her working. And she said, I realized I'm practicing to die, with I'm working with younger people and students and older people. I'm even working with ghosts of people who have died. She's like, I am myself practicing to die. And I was so moved by that because of everything it applies about ongoingness and iteration and cycles of life and death. And so Headlong will be working on that. We have a score that is an online convening score that's half contemplative and half making, and it's for citizens. It's not for specialized artists at all. So we'll be opening that back up for participation sometime soon. And people can go to Headlong and sign up for our mailing list. We're a little old-fashioned still. We do a lot with emails. I like to write, so I do share information kind of densely on emails, but you can also get on Headlong's Instagram and Facebook. We'll post information there too. Thank you for asking.
Well, I just want to remind folks you can catch COVID Calls every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. It's been a wonderful week in COVID Calls. It's been a horrifying week in terms of the illness and death that's happening, but also the vaccine has come out this week. So really a lot of up and down this week. We'll close out the COVID Calls tomorrow for this week with a discussion of COVID-19 and fair housing. We'll be talking to Mary Flannery, Mel Jones, and Orla McCaffrey. And I just want to thank David Brick for coming back. And I want to thank Eiko Otake. You're both inspirations. You shared new work with us today. Just tremendous. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Stay healthy, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow, 5 o'clock.